Hello, welcome to another midweek musing study with Pastor Andrew. That's me. I planned something a little different this week in terms of timing. Um, I have to be done in about 12 minutes because I have a meeting to go to. So that should keep it succinct, and I won't go off on so many tangents. And maybe someone will watch more than 3 minutes of one of these. Again, we continue in this book, Questions for Life, Luke's View, talking about did the events in the Bible really actually happen? And then this week, continuing in that discussion about did it really matter if Jesus rose from the dead? Last week, we talked about Jesus coming back, right? And the question he has in several of the gospel stories is, he basically says, you got any grub? So the teaching over a meal, which is, of course, a constant across Jesus' teaching, and also really, if we think throughout the whole Bible, how do we learn best around a meal? Or where do we teach best? Because, we're sharing something in a sense. I almost want to say it's almost an intimate connection. Of course, not sexual, but just that intimate, loving connection over food that we're sharing with someone else. And in the midst of that, sharing some deep, deep thoughts. So we talked about that. Got any grub? What does it mean that Jesus eats? Could it be, these are questions from last week, could it be that the disciples were delusional, imagining the entire event with Jesus? Or could it be that they made it up, right? Because they were talking and telling others about it. Jesus came, the story of doubting Thomas, and he's touching everything. Blessed are those who see or don't see and believe. And then they have a meal. He's like, hey, do you have some food? He being Jesus. Okay. And then how do we decide things? See, this is so relevant to our life now. How do we believe in things? How do we decide things? Facts, faith, gut feelings, based on science, things like that. And they're really not in conflict with one another. It's just it's almost a question of how do we do the weight or weigh everything together, Very quickly, we have science. I believe this is a gift from God for the scientists to be able to do these things, to figure these things out so that we can better our lives and progress in that. I believe that's a God's gift, and then at the same time, it's scientists expand on that gift. But, as a religious person, I believe that God's in the mix somewhere, and that's part of my faith. So, excuse me as I drink some coffee. So here we go. The question this week, was Jesus' resurrection really necessary? The story of Jonah in the Old Testament offers some parallels to and insights about the story of God saving those condemned for destruction. Remember that story? Jonah is sent or asked or called by God to go to Nineveh to say, repent of your ways. You're going down this path. And then also to say that, but it's like, but God is still with you. And Jonah doesn't want to do that. He goes the other way. He's by the ocean. He gets eaten by a big fish that brings him back, and he goes. But the whole time, Jonah, in a sense, doesn't fully believe that these people should be saved. And it's interesting because there's so many instances in the Old Testament where prophets or whomever almost seem like they're talking God out of punishment, but this is a reverse. Interesting. But side note, that's all. So, Jonah. God sent Jonah to Nineveh to rebuke people for their wickedness and to announce their pending destruction. So he did this at first, but then he's going to save them, right? But then Jonah fled. He hid in a boat headed for Tarshish. I love that name. The Lord sent a storm upon Jonah's boat. The other men of the boat threw Jonah into the sea at his request. Interesting, to save them. Then God provided a great fish to swallow up and keep Jonah for 3 days, where he prayed to the Lord. After 3 days, the fish spewed Jonah onto dry land. God saved Jonah and led him to bring salvation to Nineveh. Now, at first glance, the story sounds a lot like Jesus' story. God called him to do an act. People tried to kill him. God provided guidance. The people were saved, and the end result was positive. If we look at Matthew 12 and Luke 11, both refer to Jonah as a sign of what is to come through Jesus. I want to read those really quick for you. Matthew 12, 38 through 41. 12, 38 through 41. At that time, some of the legal experts and the Pharisees requested of Jesus, "Teacher, we would like to see a sign from you." But he replied, "An evil and unfaithful generation searches for a sign, but it won't receive any sign except Jonah's sign. Just as Jonah was in the fish's belly for 3 days and 3 nights, so the human one, Jesus, Son of Man, will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. The citizens of Nineveh will stand up in judgment with this generation and condemn it as guilty, because they changed their hearts and lives in response to Jonah's preaching. And look, someone greater than Jonah is here." Interesting. What's also interesting here is it has in italics in this version of the Bible. This is the Common English Bible. This is a big debate, right? Because it's not a whale, it's a fish. But this says whale's belly. But it's all in italics, like there's a note here, which goes to Jonah, which said to the book of Jonah, and it says, well, it may be a whale, because that's really what a big fish was, and they might have mistaken it for that. So, I don't know, whatever. Okay, so what is Jesus saying there? Someone greater than Jonah, a prophet in a sense. And then he's talking about himself. Will come, the Messiah will die and be in the heart of the earth for 3 days. And then we jump to Luke 11, 29 through 32. 29. When the crowds grew, Jesus said, "This generation is an evil generation. It looks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except Jonah's sign." So, of course, this is the same, but from Luke's perspective. "Just as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so the Son of Man will be a sign to this generation." The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with the people of this generation and condemn them, because she came from a distant land to hear Solomon's wisdom. And look, someone greater than Solomon is here. The people of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because they changed their hearts and lives in response to Jonah's preaching, and one greater than Jonah is here. So see, this is where Luke is famous for adding a bit more detail, because now we're talking about the Queen of the South. Well, who is that? Of course, we go into different details there, but he's still saying that someone, you had Jonah, who everyone held in high esteem because he came. Nineveh has changed their hearts. Nineveh was this place of wickedness, and now it's this holy place. And someone greater than Jonah, the Messiah, Son of Man, him, has come. So, really, what does that have to do with this question? Was it really necessary? We don't get that idea in there in Luke, do we? The Son of Man will go and be, specifically, as it said in Mark, will be in the earth, the heart of the earth, for 3 days. We don't hear that there, which is interesting, because Luke over-explains everything. Luke truly was both a pastor and a lawyer, because they're full of words. Okay, so I'll reread this. God provides guidance. The people were saved in Nineveh, and the end result was positive. So indeed, those two readings both refer to Jonah as a sign of what is to come through Jesus. So this is a salvation, but not only of Nineveh, right, but of everyone, all. And that sign is an explicit resurrection reference, the 3 days, etc. Jesus, like Jonah, will be away for 3 days and then return. So just a few questions here, as this has done before, some counterpoints to think about in a bit of this study. Some questions. What if God hadn't saved Jonah from the storm? Would Nineveh still be saved? Question mark, right? I want to believe, yes, it still would be, but wouldn't it be? What do you think? 2, what if God hadn't sent Jesus to be crucified? Would sinners still be saved? Again, comes up in my mind, that question, that movie, the book, Last Temptation of Christ. In that movie, in the book, Christ goes to the cross, but then Satan comes to him and says, you know what, this is enough. You've done enough. You can come down. This is a temptation, right? Because if he doesn't die on the cross, if he doesn't die, then really will everyone be saved? Will it be accomplished, right? Quote unquote. In that book, he comes down. So what happens, right? Interesting, because it plays off the divinity, humanity, right? Okay. So an activity here. Read the book of Jonah in its entirety. And then in parentheses, it's short. It is. Then read those readings I gave you, Luke 11, 29 through 32, and Matthew 12, 38 through 41. Discuss how the gospel writers use the sign of Jonah. How would the people of Jesus' time have understood that reference? So that's kind of interesting. Usually I don't include those activities, but here there's this connection of salvation, which is interesting. If you're not interested in that, I'll be interested for you. But what a fascinating thought to throw out there. Okay. Point counterpoint. From Romans 5, 18 through 19. Therefore, just as one man's, Adam, trespass led to condemnation for all, so one man's, Jesus, act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all. For just as by the one man's, Adam, disobedience, the many were made sinners, so by the one man's, Jesus, obedience, the many will be made righteous. Yeah, so this is interesting because that's also a connection to what we just heard on All Saints Sunday in Revelation. The old has passed away. This is a new beginning. That's a direct reference to the sin and Adam and Eve, of course, leaving the garden, but us now being welcomed back into paradise because of what Christ did. And I take this just as a side note, and perhaps this is where someone will comment, finally. Someone put up to argue about religion and how archaic religion is, and to say how, quote unquote, controlling Christianity is. Isn't it interesting that the first sin was knowledge? So then they go on to portray Christians as just mindless lemmings and things like that. Here's an argument, though. Is that the first sin? Or is the first sin actually something that happens outside the garden? So you have this, Adam, the old, the new, coming with Christ. All are made righteous, all are saved. Counterpoint from Jonah. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil ways, God changed his mind about the calamity that he had said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. Interesting, because God's changing God's mind. I don't know that we hear that a lot. God was going to do this thing, and then God says, no, look what they did. They've, in a sense, repented, said they're sorry, etc. And now I'm not going to do what I was going to do. That happens actually a lot. God's I think of Moses. Moses talks God out of just getting rid of everyone that God saved, etc. Um, but both of these talk about forgiveness. How do they talk about forgiveness? With that, you'll need to rewind this video and watch it again. But when we think about that, what do we learn about God? What do we learn about humanity? And here's the big question, what is required for forgiveness? So, kind of a lot thrown out there. I know some people watch this on double speed, so I sound pretty awesome when you do that. But things to think about. Was the resurrection necessary for blank, whatever, salvation, etc.? Let's close in prayer. Good and gracious God, thank you for the gifts you've given us. Be with us as we traverse this world day in and day out. Continue to guide us, and we will live, of course, in your love, trying to be that love ourselves. We give you thanks for the gift of your Son, the one who died on the cross so that we could live free from the bondage of sin and free to be your love. Amen. All right. Till next week. Oh, I'm a little bit over.